To celebrate the 30th anniversary of Infinite Jest, a new special edition of the book was released, accompanied by a foreword written by Michelle Zauner, an acclaimed singer-songwriter and best-selling author. Selecting Zauner for the foreword quickly became a divisive choice, as many die-hard Wallace fans felt as though this decision was a marketing gimmick by the publishing house, intended to attract a new audience to the book, namely women. Following the release, people quickly ran to the internet to express their dissent, citing the second line of the foreword where Zahner says those who tend to finish the book are a breed of college-aged men who talk over you, a sect of pedantic, misunderstood young men for whom, over the course of 30 years, Infinite Jest has become a rite of passage. However, it is likely Zahner prefaced the foreword with these remarks to eschew being used as the marketing tool the publishing house wants her to be. She goes on to express adulation for the prophecies, mental acuity, and immense grief lying inside the pages of Infinite Jest. Despite its reputation, the novel does much more than attract performative males and incels. It brings together recovering addicts, political and literary theorists, people struggling with depression, and those who just want to embark on a long Odyssean journey of avant-garde film, Quebecois terrorists, and an onslaught of lengthy footnotes. These people have one thing in common. They are frustrated by the overstimulating, scary, and often empty-feeling world that modernity embodies. They want an answer, a sign from the universe that while the world might feel nihilistic and bleak, there is still a beauty, a moral redemptiveness that connects us all more than we can ever know. But this book has a very intentional idea behind the chaos. Wallace was trying to send a message, not just to writers, but to readers as well. A signal that the gig is up, that literature, having to increasingly rely on flashy intellect without real substance to stay afloat, risks losing what literature is really all about in the first place. But the book doesn't just describe that problem, it makes you experience it. To see how, let's take a step back for a second.
Imagine you're a hyper-educated avant-gardist in grad school learning to write.
Right.
Right? Screen gets all fuzzy now as the viewer is invited to imagine this.
Growing up reading the likes of Pynchon, DeLillo, and Gaddis, he was fascinated by the mesmerizing prose and techniques like irony, metafiction, and moral detachment to critique the hypocrisies of the 50s and 60s. But he believed this form of fiction had run its course by the late 80s and was no longer a strategy of critique, but rather a default cultural posture, simply mimicking what had gotten sales before. In a 1993 interview with Larry McCaffrey, Wallace states, "Irony is useful for debunking illusions, but most of the illusion debunking in the US has now been done and redone. Postmodernism had become empty, a hubless wheel spinning ever faster and ever forward, rolling further and further away from its genesis as a sincere criticism of the society at hand. But how do you move past this vacuous hole literature has become? How do you break out of the postmodern cage?" Well, Wallace thinks you need to provide solutions for the problems, but this is risky. In the same interview with McCaffrey, Wallace states, "Few artists dare to try to talk about ways of working towards redeeming what's wrong, because they'll look sentimental and naive to all the weary ironists. Irony's gone from liberating to enslaving. When sales are predicated on good reviews from literary critics and academics, escaping the cage seems like an impossible endeavor." We're going to get to Infinite Jest, but it's important to give a bit of further background on his project as a writer, so bear with me here. Wallace's first attempt at escaping the cage was writing the novella titled Westward the Course of Empire Takes Its Way. This story is a critique of John Barth's hyper-metafictional short story Lost in the Funhouse. Westward's title is an allusion to the Emanuel Luzzi mural, which is on display in the west stairway of the House Wing in the U.S. Capitol. This painting suggests a divine right to hegemonic expansion, where America, initially formed in the East, must march westward and conquer. For Wallace, though, this expansion is a metaphor for the postmodern strategies of his predecessors, who have created a literal empire that has conquered its territory so thoroughly that it has become a dead end, collapsing into total self-reference. Lost in the Funhouse is a story about a boy named Ambrose who travels to Ocean City and gets lost in a literal funhouse at an amusement park. In the story, Barth writes, "In a funhouse mirror room, you can't see yourself go on forever, because no matter how you stand, your head gets in the way." This is a metaphor arguing your own intellect will always get in the way of true reflection. This is exactly the problem Wallace sees with literature. He wants his writing to affect the reader, but language in both the reader's and writer's heads are in the way. So he sets out to solve this conundrum in Westward. Wallace directly satirizes Barth's story by bringing it to its metafictional and postmodern extreme, concocting bizarre characters and plot lines that all lead up to a McDonald's commercials actors reunion where there will be a Ronald McDonald funhouse. The main character in the story is Mark Nectar, a professional archer who carries his bow everywhere and is a clear stand-in for Wallace himself. In a chaotic airport scene, Mark gives the description of how an archer must take into account that an arrow doesn't fly true. To hit the bullseye, the archer must aim slightly off-center to account for some unknown forces. Wallace is arguing here that because the postmodern reader's cynical defenses make a direct shot at the heart impossible, the writer must employ metafiction and irony to bypass those defenses. The writer must aim somewhere in between the head and the heart. By the end of Westward, Wallace's project is revealed not as a rejection of metafictional tools, but an argument for a more sophisticated use of them to finally hit the reader in the heart. In D.T. Max's biography of Wallace, he quotes Wallace saying Westward was his breakthrough, and that he had said all he needed to say in it. At the time, Wallace clearly believed this to be his magnum opus, but ironically, his metafiction had gone too far. Reviews were lackluster and the brilliance of his story did not catch the eyes he hoped it would. It is important to note that this story was written around the same time as Wallace began thinking about Infinite Jest. This is indicated by a 1986 Yaddo application where Wallace wrote the title Infinite Jest as his reason for staying. Yaddo is a prestigious artist residency in upstate New York where writers and artists of the likes of Sylvia Plath, James Baldwin, and Cormac McCarthy can stay for free to be given time and space to focus on their creative work. Since Westward came out in 1989, it is likely that the failure of this novella was still fresh on his mind when he really started writing Infinite Jest. Okay, we've made it. Now it's time to finally talk about Infinite Jest itself. It's important to mention that what I'm doing here is intended to capture Wallace's conception of the meta-theme of the book. Everything is obviously pluralistic in meaning, and you get what you want out of a book. So while ideas of transcending postmodernism might have been the catalyst for Infinite Jest, Wallace was almost certainly writing everything with a multiplicity of different meanings in mind. Ultimately, it is up to you as the reader to decide what to take away from the novel. When Infinite Jest first reached the editor Michael Peach's hands, it had a remarkably different structure, that of a Sierpinski gasket, a triangle that infinitely fractalizes in on itself. This initial form of the book is most notable because it has a different first chapter. The original first chapter is now what is Chapter 3, April 1st, Year of the Tux Medicated Pad, whereas the published first chapter, Hal's Famous Breakdown, was featured much later in the book. In this original chapter, Hal meets with a professional conversationalist who, it becomes increasingly more obvious, is actually James, Hal's father. In this conversation, Hal mentions that his father is having a hallucination that he never speaks. His father, in turn, attempts to get Hal to speak genuinely to him, but they end up quipping at each other the whole time, not really engaging, but just talking over each other. The dialogue ends with James asking for just one conversation that does not end in terror, that does not end like all the others, with Hal staring and James swallowing. Why is all of this important? For one, because it's the only scene where James is directly talking to Hal. This conversation reveals a lot about what their relationship was, and James is frustrated because while Hal can define, provide synonyms, and give the etymology for half of the dictionary, he can't have a sincere conversation with his father. Hal's behavior seems eerily similar to Wallace's problems with postmodernism. Now, going back to the breakdown scene, what is presumably the final Hal chapter in the book, you see a remarkably different human. After being beaten down by the throes of withdrawal, fascistic academia, and presumably watching the entertainment, Hal has changed. He can't cope by over intellectualizing his problems anymore, and he has started to feel the breakdown of the structure of his life in an emotional way he's never felt before. He said so himself in this quote: "I'm not a machine. I feel and believe. I have opinions. Some of them are interesting. I could, if you'd let me, talk and talk. Let's talk about anything. I believe the influence of Kierkegaard on Camus is underestimated. I believe Denis Gabor may very well have been the Antichrist. I believe Hobbes is just Rousseau in a dark mirror. I believe, with Hegel, that transcendence is absorption. I'm not just a creatus, manufactured, conditioned, bred for a function. Please don't think I don't care." But no words come out of his mouth when he says this. He's lost the ability to articulate. Hal went from an unfeeling intellectual prodigy versed in irony and articulation to a feeling, opinionated boy who has lost the ability to express his intellect. This loss of articulation isn't instantaneous, though. It happens slowly throughout the book. We see moments where he just can't recite what he used to. He tries to speak, but no words come out. Hal is stuck in a paradox. To express feeling, he must get over his intellect, and to express his intellect, he must suppress feeling. To quote the Pale King, "How odd I can have all this inside me, and to you it's just words." Wallace spent this entire book trying to turn postmodernism against itself, and ended with nothing but grotesque silence. It can be established at this point that Hal is literature itself, or at the very least David Foster Wallace's personal project of literature. If Hal is literature, then his dad, James Orrin Incandenza, is David Foster Wallace himself. His name is literally himself to Hal, and even when James is dead, he's still around in wraith form, moving furniture, scanning Don's brain, putting DMZ on toothbrushes. He's always there, manipulating people and objects alike. Do not underestimate objects, Lyle says. He's an artist, pushing the limits of what art is itself. It's not enough, though. The critics love his work for all the wrong reasons, and his protege, Hal, has been commodified and mechanized. His wife is a secret spy for the Quebecois, and his eldest son, Orrin, is a postmodern nightmare, commercialized and Oedipalized, paranoid and egoistic. His youngest son isn't even his. So what can he do? Well, he can put down the bottle and show the world the logical conclusion of their consumption. And is this not exactly what Wallace did? He sought help, went to the AA, and improved upon the ideas in Westward. James creates the Samizdat and kills himself. He leaves a piece of art so intoxicating that it becomes a virus to be contracted. He leaves a copy for Hal, knowing he'll need it to continue the cycle of literature. He needs Hal to understand that what he is becoming and what the world has become around him threatens to replace what is sacred about literature altogether. In other words, the artist sacrifices himself for his art form, leaving behind a pleasure so total it threatens to annihilate not just the world, but the will to have a world outside pure entertainment at all. It's a humanist nightmare and a solipsist dream. So the entertainment, then, is an Oedipalized depiction of the pendulum of literature itself. It shows us what we really want, what we truly desire, a caring and totalizing mother taking care of our wants and needs before we can even form them ourselves. It cuts thought out of the picture completely. It desires for us without us and consummates the desire without a single synapse needing to be fired at all. And so the jest is infinite because the cycle is inescapable and never-ending. And so the jest is infinite because the cycle is inescapable and never-ending. Literature, in order to stay alive, must become ever more entertaining, but in doing so it risks becoming only entertainment, thereby ceasing to be literature. It is a forever unstable pendulum between the intellect and the heart, and all we can do is aim our bows somewhere in between the two and pray it lands true.